Hello, my name is Debbie Boone, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, The Bend, where we explore how successful people navigated the path and emerged in a better place when life threw them an unexpected twist. It's inspired by one of my favorite sayings: the bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the curve. These conversations will hopefully help you and inspire you to embrace your personal bend and to flourish. I hope you enjoy it, and if you need help with your own personal navigation and you're in veterinary medicine, please feel free to reach out to me at Debbie Boone to Manage Vets Consulting. Enjoy the bend and be inspired by our wonderful guest. Welcome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of The Bend. I am Debbie Boone, your host, and as you know, our podcast shines a light on innovators and disruptors and change makers who are bending the profession for the better. And so today I have a really interesting guest who I have never met before. So thank you very much for Dr. Andre just randomly saying okay to a stranger and being willing to come over here and talk to me. But the reason I asked her to speak is because she mentioned something in a post, and I went, that is fascinating, and I think I need to bring that to my audience. So Dr. Casara Andre, DVM, CVMA, thank you very much for joining us today on The Bend.
It is such a pleasure to chat with you. I was so excited when you reached out as I read about some of your work. I was, of course, I would love to have this conversation. And it's a privilege to, one, meet you and the interface with your audience. So I'm thrilled for today's conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. So you're a Virginia grad, DVM, right? Doctor of Veterinary
Yes,
Medicine,
that is correct.
Virginia, Maryland. But you're also certified in medical acupuncture, and then you do the USDA, and you're a military veteran, but also reservist for the veterinary, let's see, how do I get it right? The Rocky Mountain Medical Reserve Corps of Colorado. So you have a whole lot of stuff going on here that is extremely impressive. But tell me a little bit about, kind of your journey and how did you get, I always like to, like, how did you get from there to here?
Well, just at a high level, I'll say probably I have sought out novel and emerging medicines for most of my career, really trying to find what my patients needed. So whether that be in the military when I was serving, working dogs and their handlers, or even now I really focus on trauma-informed veterinary care and the family unit, cross-species contagion, sort of emotional contagion. So really looking for the modalities that have a gap in our medicine world.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of directed all of my career and led me down some interesting pathways, such as acupuncture first.
Yeah.
That was really the first additional education I started seeking after veterinary school. And that really was for my working dogs. I just felt that I didn't have a part of my medicine. It was lacking when they just had a training accident or they had trained really hard one day and it wasn't on the surgery table and it wasn't the preventative care side. It was just, I need something that keeps them going. So the sporting medicine piece would be in the human world. And so acupuncture, rehab, now massage. I run a massage school here in Colorado, which is really fun to both teach, but also I get to practice a lot of different techniques that I'm working on. So that's a really fun project. So acupuncture was first, massage, cannabis medicine, and now again, because I practice in Colorado, psychedelic medicine. So I have sought what my patients have needed. And I think that'd be most of us in animal care.
I think so. But I think the information is limited out there into the world and certainly not in the veterinary school curriculum. So this is all like after school information that you guys are picking up. And certainly I think the cannabis stuff, it becomes of necessity because so many more states are legalizing it. And just from, kind of personal experience, I know that the reading that I do, like clients are dosing their animals whether they know what they're doing or not. And that is scary to me. So I'm glad that there are people who are scientifically exploring this for animals and proper dosing and, companies that are making it for animals rather than them just going to the the pot shop and picking up whatever gummy they want to buy for themselves and then zonking out their animal, and then we're seeing it in the ER. So thank you for thank you for that. But I did want to talk a little bit about what caught my attention, which was the trauma-informed behavior. Because as someone who has been on the Fear-Free Advisory Council
Mm,
since the
yes.
get-go, behavior is very interesting to me, human behavior and animal behavior. And there's really so much parallel between the two. As I train communication classes, you cannot leave the limbic brain system out of communication and client service. So, tell me a little bit about, how you've obviously from working dogs, focusing on trauma. But one of the things I noticed that you had in some of your materials that I was looking at was human adjacent trauma or human inflicted trauma. And I feel like that is something that we really don't shine much of a light on. And a couple of episodes back, Dr. Melinda Merck is a friend of mine, and I talked her into being on here too. But she was very influential in the prosecution of the Michael Vick dogfighting case. And we talked about those dogs and certainly trauma from being in those kind of situations. So I would love to explore this with you and how you're kind of pushing the envelope and enlightening people about these trauma in animals.
Well, it's a big topic, and I'm excited to chat about it with you, particularly because of your background, both in clinics, in classes, teaching communication. It just is something that's filling our world now, I would say, regardless of which species you're working with, that trauma that's from the past, whether you know what it is or it's just a memory that's there, intergenerational trauma, hereditary trauma, any of that. But also just as a profession, we know that our veterinary colleagues, animal care professionals, wherever you're serving, really are struggling with mental health. And I think it's important for us to recognize that some of that seeps from our patients, from our clients. Like we really are in the midst of some tough circumstances.
Mhm.
And even if we're there to make it better, to bring dogs out of a cruelty scenario and we're able to serve them and help them through that, we're still in the midst of that yuck, and we have to interface with another, that a human did this and with the consequence of that. And that has a lot to bring in terms of our mental health, how much we can continue to show up every day in the clinic, our burnout rate. So for me and several of our organizations, it's this wide ranging, like we have to advocate both for ourselves, but also really understand what's going on with the animals that we want to get through a tough circumstance.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. Some of my favorite topics to dive
Yeah,
into.
I love this. Well, thinking about just going back into the pandemic, and everybody said, "Oh, humans, they're horrible at this point in time." But if you understand a lot about neuroscience and the kind of humans love habit. We don't like to have disruption, and we don't like to have to kind of come out of our little normal comfort zone. And every week we were being pushed into a new discomfort. And so that does cause a lot of trauma. And I think we may still be that's still lingering. And of course with political upheaval and the constant ramping up of everything that happens into our world, we can't settle down. We're really struggling to settle down mentally into that. And so it makes sense to me that animals are in that same boat. And not to mention the fact that the animals that we live with are extremely attuned to us and our behavior. And if they're picking up on agitation, they're bound to be carrying that with them too.
Absolutely. And a good word to bring in. I will add to the conversation the idea that we all know and feel, but just to say it out loud, that as much as we don't like having our schedules changed and we don't like being pushed into something new that's unknown, uh, also other mammals don't enjoy that as well.
Right.
And when you bring a mammal, so we'll talk dogs and cats for the moment, who may have their own background trauma that we don't necessarily know. So having mentioned Michael Vick's dogs, actually a connection with that, I was at school in Virginia Tech when that group was broken up. So
Ah,
kind of have some interface, not with the story, I wasn't involved
right.
in it, but just as a young veterinary student,
Mhm.
growing in my career and kind of trying to figure out what that meant to interface with that story and already be having to decide, well, what does that mean for me? Like, am
Mhm.
I going to eventually be the veterinarian who receives those animals or what? It's been part of my career for a long time to try to figure out what does that mean for us as animal care practitioners to create safety for the animals that are really experiencing the spillover effects of
Mhm.
the chaos in our human world,
Mhm.
whether that be their schedule changed, them being surrendered, adopted, which we saw a lot during COVID,
Right.
or just having an animal that has a background trauma that we don't know anything about,
Mhm.
but they are still living out their life based on what they've experienced before.
Mhm.
And anyone who's adopted a shelter animal or an animal who comes from a trauma
Yeah.
background knows that some of the hard parts about that bonding is that we don't understand what the animal's triggers are. How do we make them feel safe in a way that we actually don't know what's hard for them?
Mhm.
So lots of communication across species, which makes
Yeah.
it really fun, but also challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, that is so true. I ran a shelter for the county for 3.5 years as part of the chief operating officer position when I was working for Dr. Joe
Wow.
Canarney.
How a cool position.
Oh well, it was kind of wild, and it was a really I mean, I would say it was a county that didn't have a lot of money, and
Mm,
the shelter was just wide open, and there was it got a lot of the community. It didn't even have a telephone when I got there. I mean, you couldn't call and find your pet if it was lost because there was no phone number.
wow.
So something as simple as just trying to fix that. But then again,
Mm.
we were involved in just storing a whole set of animals that were in a cockfight ring. And that was kind of it. I mean, you go in every morning, there's all roosters are crowing every single morning, and you couldn't get in there because they were very aggressive. They were aggressive. But you get
Yeah.
involved in that kind of stuff, and then confiscated animals from dogfighting rings, and then your veterinarians are trying to treat them, but you're also in the middle of a court case, and that is
Right.
traumatic for everybody. But
Right.
we were just laughing right before we started this about our dogs and our animals. The time changed here, and so now the dog doesn't know when to eat, right? So, of course, I don't know either. It's very confusing. So we are creatures of habit and routine, and that disruption certainly has effect on our animals. So I'm really curious as to kind of what you've seen, as far as emotional diseases of animals and how you work with them to overcome some of their trauma. And because it's manifested in bad behavior, and then people just want to ditch them. I just read something this morning that fascinated me because it was about animals going through adolescence. And if you think about, teenagers are a pain in the butt. And teenage animals are a pain in the butt. So, where they were pretty good and maybe you were working on potty training, and then at 18 months they just run amok. And you're like, oh my gosh, what was I doing to get this dog? Over the years, I had so many clients going, oh, what was I thinking? My old dog died, and this great old dog
I
was
thought it'd be
just,
easier.
oh, plug and play. And it's been 20 years since they had a puppy, and now it's just Katie bar the door, wild thing. So I feel like a lot of that, the animals are all, discombobulated, and the owners are all discombobulated. And that's just getting a new dog. That's not even thinking about bringing them in from a traumatic place, like adopting from a shelter, and um, all the um, all the other possibilities.
And let's also consider the animal that, from a congenital perspective, may not have the circuitry or the mechanisms all in the right place to be
Hmm.
able to respond appropriately.
Hmm.
Really, when I say cannabis, I do work with cannabis medicine, but really it's about endocannabinoid system
Hmm.
medicine. So the system that cannabis works on, and cannabis is just one of the modalities that's really
Hmm.
easy to use that works on the ECS. But we know animals that have a congenital deficiency in their ECS. And so that means that throughout their life, when that system should help them settle, so have an experience like, oh, loud noise,
Hmm.
oh, I'm okay.
Uh-huh.
And that feedback loop of settling, it may literally not be available to them.
Mhm.
And so that means throughout their life, when they do face a challenge, they're not actually able to de escalate from
Mhm.
it. And so it creates this really interesting, not appropriate feedback.
Mhm.
And if the household they're in, the circumstance they're in continues to escalate, it is chaotic, it is stressful. You can really end up with a nervous system that is so dysregulated and so miswired that it's really, really hard to make any of the training techniques that we also know work function in this particular
All
animal
right.
because their nervous system is just really not
Yeah.
able to receive it.
Yeah.
And then adjacent to like genetic, just really young traumas. So animals that were either not exposed to what they should be or were exposed to something too much, too soon. We can see those circuits created and
Mhm.
embedded in that very young animal that we don't really have ways to effectively work with now. The COVID puppy, right? That's a really big thing that everyone
Yeah.
knows, that if we don't have those right exposures early, we struggle with that animal's behavior all their life, not because the circumstance they're in now might be bad, but just because what they're coming to us with is really tough.
Right.
So most of my work is within family units where the either something going on in the pet parent's life makes it hard for them to bond or to interface with the animal, and that could be PTSD on the human side, behavioral disease on the human side. Now, I'm not the human care practitioner, but we do have individuals on our team that are licensed to work with both species or
Hmm.
just the human side. And we find that that's really, really important because no matter how much we're doing the right thing for the animal, if the family or the situation they're in isn't functioning together, it's not really going to work the way that we need it to.
Hmm.
So looking at all the parts and pieces that are playing into this animal's health and how can we make it achievable for this family. It doesn't work for us to suggest these out of price range or out of commitment time things that the pet parent just can't accomplish.
Right.
We really have to meet them where they are and think about all the different species that are kind of involved there,
Yeah.
which means that we mostly do a lot of problem solving and
Hmm.
then try to help them get connected, maybe with a practitioner that does rehab specifically or a trainer that's really good with that. But
Hmm.
most of our work is kind of untangling what's going on here. What are our goals? What can we change? What can we not? Where can we supplement? Where can we support? Yeah, a lot of untangling, I think, would
Yeah.
be a good way to describe
Yeah.
most
I can relate to that
of
because
my
that's what I
team's
do with
work.
practices when I go in and try to untangle the lack of
Yes,
SOPs or the
exactly.
confusion or the poor culture or the constant conflict is there's just a lot that's
Yes.
going on. And I think that you make a really good point that we could think about with our veterinary teams is that managers try very hard to build good culture in their hospitals, but a lot of times the people that tend to migrate to our profession are damaged by what happened to them in youth, and they bring that trauma with them into the practice. And so you can do a lot of really great things as far as culture building and being a good manager in your hospital, but still people, if they don't trust, because they couldn't trust
Yes.
their parents, that unit that's supposed to be the ultimate
Yes.
thing that you can trust. And they come into your practice, then it takes a long time, just like with a dog that's been exposed to abuse, to get them to a point of, like you said, where they can regulate their own system and
Yes.
accept that they
Yes.
really are working in a good place and that the things that they're experiencing. I was curious one day. I was asking, what does toxic mean to people? Because is it like pornography, right?
Mm.
That you see it, when you see it, but I think it means different things to different people because if you are, a high heart-driven personality style working in a fast-paced, we got to get it done clinic is probably not the best spot for you, because it's not suited to
Mm.
your own personality style. But for other people, that get her done group is like, yeah, this is my world, this is my place, these are my people, let's do it. So I feel like there's something that we need to unsimplify because we do make it very simple. It's toxic or it's not. No, it's not really any more than, untangling the stuff for the animals that you're talking about. There's no simple answer. We always want a shortcut. As humans, we like black and white. Here's a simple answer, right? And it's just not.
Yes. And when we're really have a heart for working for animals and really want to make this experience better for them,
Mhm.
I think it's very hard for us as humans to step back from the fact that we're a different species and their cognition is not the same. So we can't explain it to them.
Right.
And there can be a really big ego boundary in that I'm doing everything right. I'm giving so much to this animal. I'm
Uh-huh.
trying so hard.
Yeah.
And that's really true. Just like a good manager who's like bringing it every day
Yeah.
and putting their soul on the line.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's more about a communication shift and recognizing that. So when we're talking humans and animals,
Mhm.
we're not going to have the same communication style, but it is us agreeing on the same cue word, sit. This means you
Yeah.
get a treat. You do an action and you get something good, of being really clear in what we mean
Mhm.
and not leaning on the crutch of I can explain it to you as a human. So I can
Mhm.
tell you that I have great intentions, but
Right.
how do I explain that in non-English words to an animal? Like
Right.
massage is a great example.
Yeah.
Massage is such a soft modality, can be used by so many people, but can also be incredibly therapeutic, and you can do damage with massage. But in the midst of the modality itself, the animal's consent to be touched is this entirety in and of itself. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter what a great massage practitioner you are or how much the animal needs it. The animal can absolutely opt out of like, I don't think so.
Right.
You're not touching me today because
Yeah.
of something that has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
So many times, right at that interface of communication, it's about having a lot of humility and recognizing that that cognition is different than mine. So I need to create a lot of space for them to opt in so that
Yeah.
I can observe what's happening. And that really resonates with our, as veterinary practice,
Yeah.
scientific mindset. We are clinicians as well as researchers and scientists. And so just to be able to reframe that in, it's not necessarily something you're doing wrong,
Uh-huh.
but maybe more space is needed for
Yeah.
the animal to communicate what they need. I think
Right.
that's a really tough dynamic for us
Yeah.
to find with all the variations that can come with that.
I think, having done this for longer than I like to confess, I think that we automatically assume that because we love animals, animals will automatically come to us, want to be touched by us. And when I was teaching, and sometimes I would throw fear-free stuff in, and I went, look, think about this. A stranger comes up to you and goes, "Oh, you're so cute," and kisses you.
Please
I
no.
mean, you would absolutely be freaked out. And why do we think that's okay to do to animals who do not know us? And it really is
Mhm.
disappointing when I tell the receptionist, particularly when I'm training them, you cannot grab a kitten or a puppy out of its owner's arm, hug and kiss it and love on it and dance through the hospital with it because you're excited to see it. It's freaking
Yeah.
the dog out. You need to not do that. And they're like, oh, and I went, I know it's fun. And the puppies are all like, oh, some of them are great. Some of them are all in your face. But then you want to ask it to be calm because it needs an exam and you
Mhm.
ramped it up by getting it all wound up. And then you're expecting it to know it just needs to sit quietly over here while your doctor is
Right.
doing his exam. So you have to think about the long-term consequences of some of the stuff that we do that we enjoy, but not necessarily
Yeah.
means that our patients enjoy. Yeah,
Absolutely.
and if it's about the
Absolutely.
patient, right? It's about the patient.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I'll bring in one element there that may not be where we take the conversation
yeah,
today, but I think it's important just from like veterinary health industry to think about. There are now in our world, because of so much harm done to animals from loss of ecosystems, actual abuse, neglect, any of that, when we interface with that animal, we may not be doing something pleasant. We probably are doing something unpleasant,
yeah.
something hurtful in that moment. And I think it's a really difficult position for us as caregivers to hold, to both recognize the long-term benefit that we hope makes this animal better, but to be the hands that are unpleasant at that point in time,
Mhm.
and it to be true that the animal doesn't want that to happen, but we need to get this leg taken care of. We need to care for this wound, all the way up to behavioral euthanasia, which how much from a moral injury perspective, like that's kind of harder to get past than that. where is that on our full like scope of practice, and how do we find space for that? How do we bear witness to that? How do we remain resilient through that? So there are, aspects of all this conversation that really don't have right answers,
Mhm.
where we as practitioners are forced into the corner of what is right in this moment. Like, is my taking this animal's life actually the better decision? Sometimes, yes, absolutely. But then where does that go and where does that rest? And in our community, we talk a lot about bearing witness without absorbing. So recognizing that this hurt has happened, and where are you in the midst of that without letting it come into you so that it
Mhm.
risks your life, your health, and you can keep showing up the next day.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing in all of animal care work right now. There was a recent case in Canada that was prosecuted, a really significant animal abuse case. And one of the really important things that were brought into
Mhm.
evidence were the documentation of how much the Humane Society that would receive the reports from the public of what was going on, how much moral injury they experienced just by having to participate in this court case.
Mhm.
And so just bringing that up as trauma-informed care, of
Mhm.
recognizing that that open-hearted human who is there and ready and available
Yeah.
really can receive so much injury. So trauma-informed perspective
Yeah.
is both for caring for the client, your coworkers, and the animal that's in the
Yeah.
middle.
Yeah. And of course, having done this more than 40 years, some of the things that my practice has been involved in, and, just because of working with a lot of people who work in all aspects of animal health, some of the things that people do to animals is really horrific. And it is
Yes.
just challenging to think, first of all, that there's people like
Yes.
this in the world, but, you think, oh, they do it to animals, but they also do it to other humans. And maybe it was done
Yes.
to them. And so this is a perpetuating cycle, which you think, oh, that's how do you stop that? That's really difficult.
Yes.
And then, like you said, there's other things that I think there are animals who are just wired differently. And as much as we want to
Mhm.
fix that, you can't, right? You have to be able to say to yourself, I am not, God, I cannot fix things like this. And so I have to let it go. There's only so much within my power. I can do the best I can in the circumstances that I have. And then you have to say, okay, I have done all I can. And then I have to say, I'm
Yes.
done, I'm done. And then you go to help something else. I think one of the things that I try to teach a lot is to reflect on your day. Because yes, you're going to see one of these. And fortunately, in my practices, you don't see them often. They're very traumatic when you do, but you don't typically see them often in the day-to-day work. But in the day-to-day work, you see a lot of really good things, and you see people who take care of their animals, and you have success stories. And you need to take a little time at the end of every day to reflect back on the 90% of really great things that you accomplished that day, and not dwell on the 10% of the things that you could do absolutely nothing about. And you just have to let it go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the fact that you showed up and you were there, and
Yeah.
you might want something better, a better solution, but you were there in that
Yeah.
moment, and being really proud of having accomplished that. That is a huge thing, to be able to just in that moment be present for the animal and their guardian, no matter what the outcome is.
Yeah.
What a privilege, what a hard privilege. But yeah, it takes a lot of self work, self regulation, resiliency to accomplish that, and keep coming back, right? To
Right.
not let that burn you out, and to
Yeah.
know how you want to show up.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I remember talking to people about is making sure you acknowledge and praise the work that we're doing, the
Mm,
work that people within your team are doing, and being very specific. And I said, and also acknowledge the client. We don't think about telling that client,
yes,
thank you for coming in, thank you for paying attention, thank you for caring enough to come in. One of my students raised her hand and she said, what if you have a client that really doesn't do anything praiseworthy? I said, they walked in your door, right? They walked in your door for help. And that is enough to say, I'm glad you brought him in. And then move from there, because you can
absolutely.
find something in that to work with. And even though people are difficult and they can be difficult, but if you start out saying, thank you for bringing him in, good catch, it can change the tone of everything else that you do in that visit. let's talk a little bit about canine anxiety, and also talk about chronic pain. And I know you do rehab stuff too. So one of my practitioner clients did had been doing rehab for 25 years, so she was kind of into it before it was a thing, and it was amazing to me the success that we had. And of course, she did train sporting dogs and working dogs, and really help keep them in condition. So I feel like there's a lot um, with that we as veterinary teams often forget to refer. Those kind of things. We're just trying to think, here's the medication, here cage rest, here do this, but what about referring out to other modalities of care that maybe aren't on our radar, maybe should be?
Sure. And that we might not be, maybe it's on our radar, but we're not the best practitioner for that. I think that that interface can often feel overwhelming, particularly from that do no harm perspective. Because
Mhm.
when they're in our care circle, we can sort of be participator, strong guiders that there isn't harm happening, that we can monitor, we can assess, we can talk to the client. But as soon as we sort of send that out our door, I'll just reflect personally. I think that there's just a lot of trust that I need in that practitioner that they're going to care for this animal and the family in the same way. So thinking about how that interface happens, how does the owner have the ability to reflect back to you? Here's how it's going. Here's a check-in. Here's some questions that I have for you. You communicate with that other practitioner. So that's what we try to do a lot of is that circular care
Mhm.
team communication. And I
Mhm.
think in today's world, that can feel like a lot and kind of overwhelming. But I think it's a really important piece of us as practitioners keeping on the same
Mhm.
page and making the caregiver and the patient feel like they're supported on all sides. So even if it's a modality that I haven't heard about, my clients bring me new stuff all the time, and I'm like, huh. I've not heard about that. I will research that. To having a really good list of referrals just to the community aspect,
Mhm.
to making sure that everyone, you know everyone in your area, that you're tied into your local networks and your local communities. I think that really creates a lot of safety for your cases. So that
Mhm.
even if it's not the right referral or they don't know the right answer, that your client doesn't feel stuck there. They feel like, let's try it out together. Let's problem solve it as we go
Mhm.
and see how this works. I think
Mhm.
rehab's a great option for that. I do practice acupuncture, but I definitely know different styles of acupuncture among my colleagues where like this condition would be perfect for
Mhm.
so and so, or they really love working on this type of internal medicine case.
Mhm.
And just being willing to share that patient load, I think makes us feel more connected as practitioners. But importantly, that animal has a lot more resources to
Yeah.
pull from and that
Yeah.
family's better supported.
Well, I think one of, the things I tell my clients is as a consultant, look, I don't know everything. I've been doing it a long time, but there's a lot of stuff that is not in my wheelhouse. But the good thing about it is I have a vast network of people, and I know people
Hey,
who are highly
yeah.
capable at other things, and I have no problem turfing that off to somebody else or saying, this is who you need for this. This person is the marketing expert. This person is the profit solver guru. Let's do those things. And I feel like veterinary referral networks, when they work well, work really, efficiently. And if there is trust between the practitioners and in working with specialty and ER hospitals and referral centers, and look, you have two sets of clients. You have your clients that walk in the door, and you're referring veterinarians because if you're not communicating well with them, or their clients go back to, your clients go back to them and go, wow, this person was evil and I don't want to work with them anymore, then that is diminishing, a person you can work with. So you've got to make sure that there's really good communication going both directions. And I feel like, some of the specialists I've worked with, they just want to pick up the phone and talk to the practitioner. And others are like, oh, we'll just send records over and we'll send notes and we'll send stuff like that. But you got to ask on the other side of the coin, like, how do you want to be communicated with? What do you want from me? So that you're getting
Absolutely.
appropriate communication, because I may not want you to pick up the phone and talk to me because my day is up to, my ears and alligators, but send me some stuff that I can read after hours and then I'll do that. But yeah, so it's all about asking, right? It's just got to keep asking.
Yeah,
I'm
and
curious.
keeping those communication
Yeah.
channels open, I think, is really important. What I feel like has worked well in some of my not emerging medicine practices, so particularly cannabis, if that practitioner may not be familiar with that, being really over communicative on my side from the beginning.
Mhm.
Uh, the initial email says, your client has approached us for this question. How do you feel about this in the case? What are your treatment goals? We'd love to see your records so that we can align with what you're working on, and kind of overemphasizing we're here to support you as the primary care. And I'll
Mhm.
just mention we do most of our work is I do see patients in person in Colorado, but global, particularly with cannabis and psychedelics. So we do a lot of virtual consultation, and particularly then to make sure that you are focusing on the primary care or the primary care on the ground team. What are your goals here? Like, what are your capabilities? What are you excited to learn? Do you want
Mhm.
to sit in on a call? Those are really fun when we have the other care teams
Okay.
participate. I think that really creates a supportive environment. One thing that I have found that I'll use the term struggle with, or maybe continue to look for an opportunity to grow and would love any suggestions, is when the client does come back to me and say, that didn't work very well. Or for most of my cases, because there's some type of behavioral health or cooperative care issue, more that one wasn't a good fit for the patient, that the
Mhm.
patient opted out. The patient really struggled with a particular technician. The patient really struggled with a particular veterinarian. So, because I'm really working with that family to try to get the animal to opt into their care, there's just a delicate balance of then what is my role in advocating for this family with
Mhm.
that referring team to approach whoever the owner is or the manager and just give space for what the owner told me, but maybe didn't feel confident enough to tell that
Mhm.
team to say, well, there is some conflict here, and there
Yeah.
are some things that the animal's struggling with. Can I help? Can I come? Can we prep better? What would you like to see? So I think that that's definitely an area that takes a
Mhm.
lot of careful, intentional
Yes.
communication.
Yeah.
What are your
Because
thoughts on that
it
one?
can be accusatory if you're not careful. Like your team is
Hmm.
failing the patient. And of course, none of us want to do that. But, curiosity is always our friend, and asking good questions
Yes.
and just constantly asking
Yes.
questions like, what do you think could have happened? What do you think about this technician would have been off-putting to the animal because it seemed fine with the other ones, but this one does this one do something
Hmm.
differently? It could be
Hmm.
as simple as the cologne she was wearing, or maybe she smoked and nobody else did. And it's a
Yes.
trigger, right? It's just a trigger.
Yes.
And we have to be open also as veterinary team members to not take it personally, to say, this is not about me. This is about what's best for this animal. And let me figure it out. And, it's really hard to put your
Hmm.
ego aside a lot of times, especially when you're good at your job and you really are invested and you want to do good things for the animals. But not everybody likes everybody, and not every animal likes everybody. I mean, I walk Tucker through the neighborhood, and there is one dog that barks at him because Ozzy is nervous and he's afraid of Tucker. Well, Tucker
Uh-huh.
weighs 17 pounds. He's a little white, fluffy dog. But there's another little old grumpy dog whose owner goes, this dog likes no other dogs. Well, she likes Tucker. So they have a conversation. So it's just, even the dogs are that way. They don't like everybody, and they have their dog friends. And we shouldn't force them to like dogs they don't like. That's the other part too.
Absolutely.
It's all
Absolutely.
right. It's all right.
And from the beginning of our conversation, saying that they may have had experiences that we don't know. So
Right.
we could be not wrong,
Yeah.
but it's somehow hard for them. And I think
Right.
just what you said there of putting our
Yeah.
ego aside and just
Yeah.
how can I serve better? There's
Yeah.
something I don't understand here. Let's
Yeah.
problem solve together.
Yeah.
Yeah, curiosity always leads
It
in a
you
good
know,
direction.
and animals are so unique in themselves. I mean, I got Tucker, and he came from a show background, and he is absolutely bulletproof when it comes to meeting new people, riding in cars, jumping into a car. I mean, he can't wait to get in a car. But and the vacuum cleaner, he could care less. But the thing that makes him bark is we have one of those spin mops. He doesn't like the sound of the spin mop, and he barks at the spin mops. We're like, what is it about the mop that drives this dog crazy? We don't know. We have no idea. So we just don't put the spin mop. We put him up when the mop comes out. We go, okay. He doesn't like it. We won't force it on him, and he's not gonna, and place
Yeah,
it in
that
the way
works.
when he's barking at the mop. But we have to, I think sometimes we just have to realize that, these are really sentient beings, and we can't
Hmm.
make them autoplay. just because we want them to. That's not how they work. And I feel like each one of my dogs has always been, a unique personality that like certain things, dislike certain things. And as far as I could accommodate that, I managed to do it. Obviously, I'm not going to let them chew up my furniture because they like it, but there's limits, just
There's
like
limits.
boundaries. There are boundaries for everything, and that goes for the dog. Oh man. So I would love to hear like a particular case study. Can you give me an example of something that it was kind of unique? I think that would be fun for people to listen to.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'll pull from some of my more recent work, which as a community and several of our teams are just really brainstorming on at the moment. Again, it comes from being a practitioner in Colorado, just like being a practitioner in Colorado really forced some brainstorming when cannabis came on the rise. It wasn't really because veterinarians were interested in it. It's like, oh, the animal has it in them. We should figure out what to do. So more about like we need to
Intentionally or
respond to
unintentionally, it
this.
was in there, right?
Exactly. So similarly, we see psychedelic
Mhm.
use rising hugely. It is an industry that is burgeoning in and of itself from a money perspective, from an interest perspective, from an availability perspective. And I will absolutely say that this is an industry that's really hard for me to interface with personally and professionally because there is so much harm happening to animals adjacent to human use of psychedelics without that recognition of how our decisions spill over to the animals adjacent to us. So there's some hard conversations that come up. But we are working quite hard to be positioned in a way that we can give harm reduction education, can influence policy as it emerges, have or putting out things for our colleagues, how to respond to an intoxication, all of those. But a case that really springs to mind are some of the ones that I have been working with adjacent to human use of psychedelics. So the human is participating either with a facilitator or at home use of these substances that intentionally change your psychology, your physiology, and your psychology. And where we see animals really struggle is when there's a very close bond, so but not really firmly attached. So maybe a recent adoptive animal or an animal that does have a trauma background. And when that human really changes their side of the bond, there's a lot of strain on whoever else is connected to that bond. And I
Mhm.
think you will understand that, and your listeners will understand that. But if you don't really understand how tightly that human animal bond is and how bi-directional it is, it doesn't always make a lot of sense. And the human can be very well intentioned towards their animal, but not really thinking about what I'm doing. I'm trying to make myself better for my animal, but doing it with the being that is next to you is really important.
Mhm.
So I've seen both sides of the harm potential for that. But what I'll bring for this conversation is one of the really amazing cases that we've seen where pet parents are approaching this new modality for them really intentionally and talking to their facilitator, their guide about the fact that they have an animal dependent. And so they bring it into their preparation and say, I want to make sure that I'm planning for my animals' well-being, where are they staying, who's sitting with them while I'm in session with you. And then as I'm changing, as I'm trying to rewire my circuitry, how am I rewiring with my animal? And so what we see now is facilitators starting to ask, how is your animal doing? Have y'all gone for walks together?
Uh-huh.
Is your animal's behavior getting better? Is your dog's anxiety decreasing? Sort of as a marker of like how healthy this
Uh-huh.
bond is. And I think, again, I don't think that surprises any of us, but I
Yeah.
think what's really amazing about it is it gives us as an animal care profession and industry and community an opportunity to really talk about this bond, that this bond is bi-directional and
Mhm.
we know humans benefit from animals.
Mhm.
So zuaya is the term for humans experiencing positive health benefits from an animal. And we want to ask, well, can we go the opposite direction? Can we intentionally help that human practice some breath work, some somatic care, some mindfulness,
Mhm.
and actually cross that bond in the other way,
Mhm.
help the animal settle? So our term for that is interspecies medicine. So
Yeah.
really working across species. And what's really amazing and beautiful is we see it be pretty effective. If we can help that human just de-escalate a little bit,
Mhm.
be more mindful in some of those stressful moments when they're just like sky high and the animal's responding. Can we train that human to bring themselves back into regulation and really see it affect the animal in
Mhm.
positive ways? So there's a lot of harm, a lot of negative,
Yep.
but there's also some really amazing potential
Yeah.
of really working across that human animal bond. And I think for our profession, emphasizing that this exists, that
Yeah.
we are intricately connected to all of the animals that are around us, and we can influence them negatively, yeah,
Yeah.
but also positively. And we can bring that into the world that we want to. So that's we have a couple of
That
cases
is
like
cool.
that.
Well, I mean, just think about bringing an animal into the veterinary hospital. Some clients are
Yes.
happy-go-lucky, really calm, excited to come in, super relaxed, and the dog is like la 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 la. And then the other clients are just an anxiety pill. I mean, they're just like all over the place. And then that animal is picking up on that vibe. And then, of course, you got to reach your hand in a cage and pull them out. So, so I think one of the things I really have enjoyed learning about in some of the fear-free stuff is pre-visit protocols and really teaching the animal owner to do some things that get the animal acclimated to
Yes.
travel. And then the other thing is to get the owner acclimated to, to mentally prepared. Because I have people come in and they were like, I am so embarrassed. My dog just acts so, horribly. We're like, well, some of that is, it's feeding on it because we could take them into the back of the hospital and the dog's like, yeah, dude, I'm fine. It's the owner. Sometimes it is the one who actually needs the Valium, not the dog. And so if we could, even coach that a little bit to the owners who are super anxious. I mean, like I said, I've dealt with so many different people in my life, and I remember so well we had an owner who was just, I mean, she had obviously had issues, but she loved Casey, her little dog. And she brought him in for every little sneeze and every little hiccup and everything. So obviously a good owner, she paid a lot of attention, but maybe she paid too much attention, right? Because the dog was an anxious wreck because she was constantly hovering over it. And so he was in there for a case of diarrhea, and she called our hospital 32 times before lunch to check on
Mm.
Casey. And so if I pulled her to the side and went, Nancy, I know that you're really anxious about Casey, but you do want the doctor to work on him, right? She said, yes. And I said, well, she can't do that if she's talking to you 30 times on the phone before lunch. I said, you've got to, give her time to do the work that you're asking her to do, and she can't do that talking to you. So you've got to think about that before you pick up the phone and call. She said, I know, I'm just so nervous. I said, I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he's here. This is the reason he's here is
Yeah.
because you trust Dr. Carroll to do the right thing for him,
Absolutely.
and that's why we're here. Yeah, I know. So it's just, I mean, I think a lot of times at the front desk, particularly, people don't understand what a juggling act that is and the finesse that it takes to do it well, and what a
Absolutely.
challenging job is. But it's things like that that front desk
That
well
takes
trained,
skill.
it takes a lot of skill. It does. And it takes emotional intelligence and control over yourself to not go, oh my
Absolutely.
God, why am I dealing with this
Absolutely.
crazy woman? Yeah.
And
And
some techniques of how you manage yourself in the midst
yeah.
of another human being quite activated. There's a recent paper labeling this. So it's emotional contagion is the term
Hmm.
for truly
Yeah,
spreading across either ourselves, across
absolutely.
species, or across
Panic. Just watch
between
panic.
species or cross species. Absolutely. And
Hmm.
it can be contagious in a way that you don't even recognize. You can
Hmm.
just find yourself escalated
Hmm.
after a situation where others were escalated.
Hmm.
And we don't always know what to do in that moment of actually how to get ourselves down,
Hmm.
especially if we're in work mode. We're still
Yeah.
on, but to tick ourselves down just a little bit.
Hmm.
So having specific skill sets to do that, specific protocols,
Hmm.
particular things that you practice as a team can be really helpful.
Hmm.
I also think it's really interesting to talk about roles of veterinary social workers in clinics
Hmm.
now, and I'm excited to see that rise at least a little bit, and what a valuable role those individuals play, both for supporting the team, but also for kind of beginning to interface with that
Oh,
client
sure.
interaction when the
Oh,
team
yeah.
is busy and they are actively caring for that
Mhm,
animal, but the owner is activated for whatever reason.
mhm,
Is there someone who has that training, right? There's an
mhm,
important piece, is who
mhm.
has the training to actually step in, intervene, advocate for,
Yeah.
and help all of this go more smoothly. But I think it's still the training aspect. A lot of these skill sets aren't, they're not included in most curriculums.
Yeah.
And it really does take some intentionality from us as a animal care community to say, well, what is the thing that keeps us in this game?
Mhm.
And us being able to regulate well, I think
Yeah.
is a huge, huge
Oh,
marker of that.
absolutely. Well, even pattern breathing, you mentioned it earlier, but I
Yes.
train teams on box breathing, and I said, even
Hmm.
if it's not you that's dysregulated, if you model box breathing, it's contagious. Like people pick up on it, and you have to watch your body language and be relaxed in your shoulders and
Yes.
watch how you're standing because all of that either is people mirror that. And so if we're mirroring
Yes.
somebody in front of us who is actively calming themselves and just slow your conversation and slow your the speed of your voice and kind of ease that tone, everything about that goes right? It's the but you can create without making
A
the
bit more
noise.
breath
Yeah.
available. Whew.
Oh, yes, yes. But what is our instinct? Our instinct is somebody is getting loud, we get louder. They get louder, we get louder, and
Mhm.
soon you're just calling the police, and it's a fiasco. But we can train ourselves to what to do in those situations. And a lot of times people go, "Well, she was very nice," but nice isn't enough. Nice
Mhm.
doesn't work when people are hijacked mentally by their limbic brain system. We have to have
Absolutely.
a technique. We have to have skills and techniques, and we have to understand enough about what's going on to see it. One of my favorite things is in talking to technicians and doctors, particularly who are fear-free certified, is to parallel it with the humans and the light bulbs. You see the light bulbs going off, like, oh, this makes so much sense. My favorite slide is I have this angry man and this angry dog, and I put them side by side and went, look at the similarity, look at the body language of both of these creatures,
Mhm.
and tell me what you see. And there's the same thing. The hackles are up, the teeth are barred, the eyebrows are arched, the eyes are wide. All of the same things are happening in angry human. And I went, good, would you go pet this dog? And everybody's like, no. I went, but of course, there's always one technician go, I got it. I'm the dog wrangler. I can handle that one. I'm
You
like,
know?
stop, stop. Yeah. So, so I think your work is just such a fascinating intersection of the peopling part of it and the animal part of behavior. It's amazing. Now, I'm really curious about how you talk to people about cannabis. Are people coming to you and saying, "I understand that you're a cannabis practitioner and you understand these modalities"? Um, they just don't show up out of the blue, or are they referred over by other vets, or yeah.
It's a wide range. So we do work globally because cannabis is a global phenomenon.
Hmm.
So that means that our approach is very science-based. It's very much about the endocannabinoid system and these molecules that are derived from the cannabis plant, but understanding how they interface with the ECS. So then depends on where the practitioner or the pet parent is calling from. If it's a practitioner in a country where working with cannabis is easy and accessible, maybe we're just giving that education background. Here's how to get started, how to read a COA. That's kind of one of the most confusing parts. Like, what does this lab report mean? And we all love
Mhm.
lab reports, so
Oh
that's
yeah.
huge. Or a pet parent calling and saying, I really want to work with this modality, regardless of which country they're from. And my primary care vet's on board, but they just don't feel comfortable with the modality. Can you help put a protocol together? So
Mhm.
mostly my team would do the education bit or the molecular protocol design, and
Mhm.
then work with whatever happens to be accessible, whether you're
Mhm.
in Australia or New Zealand. We have a graduate from our certification class that's in South Africa, lots of Canadians. So it really just depends on where that question's
Mhm.
coming from. Now, again, I'm in Colorado, so most pets have been exposed to cannabis in
Yep.
some way, whether it's the gas station product or something that's actually intended for animals. So it's always a harm reduction approach,
Hmm.
making sure the client feels really comfortable telling me whatever is in your animal I need to know about. We have some papers now, a really recent one by one of our previous medical directors about cannabis as a pre-anesthetic, so the effect that it has on propofol and all of our other drugs.
Hmm.
So really emphasizing that as a clinician, I need to know.
Hmm.
No matter what you're using, supplement or otherwise, I need
Hmm.
to know what it is because it affects choices that I'm going to make. So,
Hmm.
one, I think that's communication of making that an open, safe space for the pet parent to tell me anything. Thank you for bringing me whatever you want to tell me. I'm ready to receive it.
Hmm.
And then really emphasizing harm reduction. So, that could be helping them find a product that is safer, that matches their goals. It could be designing a protocol that actually matches the molecular mechanism to the physiology they're trying to work with, or just giving them some guidance on let's not use a product that has heavy metals. Let's
Hmm.
not use something that has pesticides. So, really, our work can range all across that scope, and it really depends on where that individual is coming
Hmm.
from. What I love most about our cannabis program is our certification class and teaching technicians, credentialed or otherwise, whoever holds kind of that medical support role, how to give that counseling themselves.
Hmm.
Because it really is our technical staff that's going to receive the question. Hey, I
Hmm.
didn't want to tell you while the vet was in the room,
Yeah.
but what do you think about cannabis? Happens all the time.
Yeah.
And so we found really giving education and support and information there has kept a lot of animals safe. And then the clinic team has kind of their expert. They have someone who knows the pros and cons and can help look at products that are in the area. So we try to keep it wide. And I think
Hmm.
that's really helped us serve as cannabis market changes
Hmm.
globally. Whenever something changes from a policy perspective, we're available, can do consulting, work on the research side. So really just trying to get veterinary input out into that emerging field.
Yeah. That's great. I'm curious as to because I'm in South Carolina and we're lucky we have liquor by the drink here. This is very Bible Belt where we live. So my curiosity is why are people treating their animals with cannabis for like what specific things do they feel like this is necessary for their animal?
Mm, great question. Most of the time, the human or someone close to the human has had a positive experience.
Hmm.
I've used it for myself and I felt better.
Hmm.
My mother used it, they felt better. Especially in an area that you might not have a lot of cannabis use. That's probably the most common reason is
Hmm.
the human had a positive experience. And then there is starting to be some great research, definitely on the human side and now on the animal side about use in pain. That would probably be the number one reason that pet parents
Hmm.
want to use it. Seizures, behavior. So there are now scientific ways that we can explain what's happening and can match that molecule to the mechanism. But I would say from an owner perspective, why do I want to use it? It it always comes from that good intention. I
Hmm.
want my animal to feel better. And
Hmm.
this seems like a modality that I've heard about or experienced that
Hmm.
really seems like it could support in some way.
Hmm.
And then I'll say, which you'll know all about from working in so many different industries and clinics, that's where we really have to be careful against the branding, marketing, because we have a really intentional caregiving owner that can really just be tricked by a bottle that has a paw print on it
Oh, yeah.
and a pretty color palette in the background.
Yeah.
So when we say harm reduction, sometimes it's that point of the
Hmm.
owner's already decided, the owner's already initiated. This is an owner initiated modality many of the
Hmm.
times, but not letting them get taken advantage of
Right.
by something that is actually actively harmful to their animal or is just really expensive and shouldn't be, and giving some consumer protection as well.
Yeah. It's so challenging to fight the internet. And
Well
the
said.
things that are out there into the universe and it's just a struggle all the time with the things that somebody said that I thought was a really great point is to find out the guru who is hawking whatever this happens to be, follow the money trail. Like, what are they getting out of it? Because I see that with a lot of veterinarians, and I look at the advice that they give, and honestly, it just makes me want to pull my hair out. And you think, oh yeah,
Mm.
and then there's like five supplements that they're selling, or some kind of specific food that they're selling. And I'm like, oh, you know what, this is all, or this program, or this, that's it. So I feel like we need to teach people to be a little more skeptical about the snake
Agreed.
oil salesman, right? P.T. Barnum said a sucker's born every minute, and that has not changed in 100 years. So there we go, right? Probably in 2000 years, honestly.
One One way that we find really useful to have that conversation, because sometimes the pet guardian is really invested in
Uh-huh.
that decision they made, or again, if they have a positive experience, really want to give that to their animal. And it can just be hard to untangle some of those great branding, great
Yeah.
marketing from the internet side.
Yes.
So, as a tool, what I found most useful is really emphasizing the importance of journaling at home every day. And that gives me a way to have some of these conversations that let the pet parent be the judge. So I help them determine, what are your goals? What do you want to see happen? I want my dog to be more comfortable on their walks. Fantastic. Okay, we're going to journal that. It's not just whether you think, so we take that placebo part out, whether
Hmm.
you think it's better, we're going to
Hmm.
put a number scale to it. 1 to 10, scribble on a piece of paper, here's a template, but I want you to do it at every walk. And then we're going to see if the product that you're using makes that better, or does it make it worse? And I found that just like showing someone a body condition score,
Yeah.
it's like, where do you think your animal is? Kind of fat. Like, oh, well, I'm glad you said that.
Yep.
I was going to say the
Better
same.
for
I
you to
think you're
discover
right.
it on your own than for me to tell you. Hmm.
And it just decreases a lot of the conflict
Hmm.
around me saying something about a brand or needing to research a brand. Like, is this working for your animal? Is it safe? And is it accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish? And then what's nice is I can put that as part of my medical record, in that I'm not really even guiding about cannabis. I'm really trying to keep this pet safe.
Hmm.
So I will talk to any client about it because they're asking me questions for it and I want that animal to be safe. But many times that day-to-day tracking is the keystone of
Hmm.
helping that pet parent accomplish what they want to. They
Right.
wanted to do something for their animal. So is it working or not? And we want to do that for any modality
Yeah.
and any medication. But for these fringe things that are
Uh-huh.
really hard to combat the
Yeah.
internet on, I think journaling and engaging with your client with the journal. Let me see it. I want to see it. How was this day? What happened
Hmm.
here? Has
Hmm.
been a really big tool that's been
Yeah.
super useful.
Yeah. That's a really great idea because I feel like a lot of times in coaching communication, it's much better for people to discover things on their own than for you to try to come down as the authority and teach them.
Yeah.
And just to ask that question, is this working for you? How do you feel like, I mean, I over the years I've had people, ask me for things and I'm like, well, I don't want you to waste your money. So let's look at some things that we know work rather than kind of going off over here and try that first and let's see how that works. And I think it'll save you some money too, because that's another good hook, right? It'll save you a little bit of money and you won't have to worry about it, harming your animal in any way. Um, well, communicating with humans is always, for me, has been the fun part of vet med. And I know a lot of times I used to laugh and say people would put their application in and I like animals, I don't like people, and like you can't work for me. I just throw it in the trash because this is not who I want. You've got to like people to do this job well and to be fascinated with the puzzle, right? I think that's just it.
Mm,
And you talked about the untangling, and that is just a great word for it because that's the way I look at, untangling the challenges of a client and why they're being difficult and all that, the team dynamic and untangling the team dynamic and getting down to the bare bones of what is it that is really bothering you? Because I can remember reading one of my favorite books is called Dealing with Crazy, and it's written by a psychiatrist. And he says, where they're taught in school is the problem that the client brings to you or the patient brings to you is never really the problem. There's always something deeper, something that obscure that they don't want you to know, that they're going to state that this is the problem, but it's
they may
really
not even know.
that's right. They really don't even know until you kind of work to reveal it. So I always feel like you got to be willing to put the puzzle pieces together and to be fascinated by that in order to do this job really, really well. And I think you're
Yes.
working on it.
Absolutely. I love that analogy and I resonate with that completely. The puzzle. And in the picture I have in my mind of that, it's the puzzle without edges, which I always do. I always do the puzzle without doing the edges
Oh,
first because you don't necessarily know what the picture is you're trying to create. And
Uh-huh.
particularly as practitioners and with nonverbal mammals across
Yeah.
species, we don't even know what the puzzle piece shape is or what we're trying to build.
Yeah.
But just interfacing with what's brought to you and staying really open and listening really carefully,
Mhm.
those will keep you safe through most any tangled interaction.
Yeah.
But it's also possible you're missing a piece. So
Uh-huh.
you have to be, I think, really resilient about coming back to that puzzle again
Mhm.
and again and not self-reflecting negatively when you're not
Yeah.
finishing it. You are there working on the puzzle. You
Right.
are actively putting that engagement and that
Yeah.
energy and that heart and that courage into solving it. So for all of your audience who I'm certain are in those difficult circumstances, good for you for sticking with it. Like you're there. You are showing up in that moment where that family and that animal needs you. And as you said, just to reflect on that and give yourself some credit because you're
Yeah.
doing some good work, some good hard
Yeah.
work, and that can be hard to remember.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to ask somebody else to look at the puzzle and add a piece, right?
Yes.
One of the things that I do every year, I have a group of 10 good girlfriends, and we all go to the beach together every year. And we all do a puzzle. The puzzle stays out the whole weekend, and we randomly walk by. And so there's 10 people working this puzzle. I personally have no patience, so I put in like two pieces the whole weekend. And other people just sit and intensely work on it. But I just feel like that is such an appropriate analogy. Is it's okay, other people have some of the pieces of the puzzle. You don't have to have them all. And then be willing to accept the help. That's the other part of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well said. I love that
Yeah.
analogy.
This has been a great conversation. I think we could talk about this for hours because I just follow this whole thing is just fascinating to me. And I'm sure that, the challenge of dealing with cannabis, it's happening in every state where it becomes legal, but then you're dealing with it all over the world. But the managers always have a challenge with it's prescribed for some of
Yes.
our staff, and then what are you drug testing? Are they impaired? Is there a challenge there? So it brought up a whole can of worms that we probably were not prepared to deal with. And I'm glad that there are people out there who are just saying, okay, we're going to chip away with this. We're going to really find the data. We're going to do it scientifically and that's what we need. We definitely need that. So we will put all your information in the show notes and make sure that people can get in contact with you and your companies. And not to mention the fact you have like five different things you're involved in. And we're like, oh my God, I thought I was bad. You win.
No, we're just kindred spirits. That's
Yeah.
all it is. You just
It's
gotta,
like
roll up your sleeves. Something needs to
and
be
just
solved.
get
So pitch
involved.
in.
Yeah, just get involved with a lot of things that interest us. So thank you again. And to the audience, thank you again for coming and joining us on the Bend. If this episode sparked an idea for you, share it with a friend, leave us a review, tag us on social, and we'd love to hear your reaction to this and the challenges that you're facing with some of these traumatic, emotional animal cases that you're dealing with, and maybe even some of your problems with cannabis in some of those legal states where we're struggling to try to find good information. So, thank you all again for joining us today.